Cool.
All right, good morning. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good. All right, so today I want to talk a little bit about owning homes and using your personal homes to create wealth. So what would it look like if your personal homes, if instead of selling them to buy another house, what if you never sold them? Think about my parents, when you bought your first house, how much did you pay for it?
$42,900.
$42,900. So figure that was how many years ago?
Many.
44 years ago. So think about what that house is worth today. Right?
280.
Yeah, 280, 300 maybe, who knows?
Crestwood, yeah.
Right? Yeah, probably 300.
Yeah.
So think about if you didn't sell that. You'd have all of that equity in that home. So instead of selling it, so what I'm going to look at here today is, what if instead of selling our personal homes when we buy another one, we keep them? Because if you look at that instance, how great would it be to have something sitting there that you generated rental income on for the last 40 years, and now it's worth $300,000 as well, rather than selling it and buying another one. So think about this. If we bought, we're going to factor an annual appreciation of 4% on the spreadsheet, expected annual rent increase of 2.5%, an income loss of 5%, because we're going to do deductions on the property we own after we rent them out, and then a rental net operating margin of 25%. So let's just say you bought a house this year for $300,000. You bought it in January. So you can see here, home number one in year one. You paid $300,000 for the house, and you can tweak these numbers, and we're going to send the spreadsheet out. I just couldn't figure out how to get the privacy settings off, the share settings, but 5% down, $15,000 at 6.75% interest rate. At the end of year one, your 300K property should be worth $312,000 with an unpaid principal of $281, which already immediately gives you a net worth, cumulative net worth of $30,000 off just owning your first house. Now, instead of selling that house, in year three, you're going to buy another one and rent this out. So you're going to rent it out for $1,950, which I think is probably a little light too. You probably get more rent for that. But instead of selling it, you're going to rent it out, and you're going to buy a house for $375,000, putting 5% down. Now people are like, well, how can I afford two houses? I have to sell my debt to income. Well, we've got part of the wealth creation is we have to increase income. So if we're stuck making the same money for the rest of our lives, this might not work. But in our industry especially, we can increase income and create more wealth and create more money from that. That's part of the wealth creation is one, create income, two, you have to increase it. So now if I can buy this property at the end of 2028, my principal unpaid balance is $263 on the first house. Well, now I buy another home for $375, putting 5% down at 6.5% interest, and I hang on to that. So now look at my cumulative growth of net income at 2028. It's 115. So at the end of 2033, I'm at a 271 cumulative net worth. All right, and the point here is, if I buy another one at year 7 and another one at year 9, in 30 years, the cumulative net worth of myself owning 5 homes now that I didn't sell, and all I'm doing is buying these, living in them for a couple of years, buying another one, renting it out instead of selling, my cumulative net worth is almost $8 million in the year 2053. So 30 years from now. So instead of selling all of these homes, and let's just say I end up in 25 years, I buy a house for $732,000, which I still have debt on in that, but what's my net worth had I sold all of my other houses on the house? It's probably within 5 years, maybe $800,000 or something like that. Right. But if I keep all of these, I can have a cumulative net worth of almost $8 million.
What would the cash flow be?
So your cash flow is going to be
so total.
Well, see, and that's the thing too. So it's significant, right? So if we look here, you're looking at your cumulative net worth growth, your rental cash flow. So on the first property, you're going to make $221,000 in 30 years on property one. But by the end of it, because like on this last property, if you rent it, then you're making $47.61 a month.
What do you base that on?
Just rental increase from where it's at today, and then what the property's worth and what it could potentially rent for.
Okay.
So you're bringing in rental cash flow, like look here, $313,000, and then your last property you're living in it, so there's no cash flow on that, but you're bringing in over $300,000 a year in rental cash flow.
Off 4 houses?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So so many people say that I need to sell my house so I can afford to buy my next house.
Right. Yeah.
Right. In this model, how do you leverage what you currently own and make the jump to purchase your next property?
So one, you have to get creative with financing because one, you're paying down principal. So within 5 years, you're paying down your unpaid principal balance on this one's 263 now,
Right.
and it's worth 381. So you've got over 100,000 in equity there.
Mhm.
So when you get with bankers and start looking at like with the local bankers and that, you can start figuring out how to leverage the equity in these homes to be able to go afford to buy another one.
So would you work with a mortgage lender or would you work with a bank?
Probably a bank,
A
a
bank.
normal local bank. Yeah.
Okay,
Because once you start getting multiple mortgages, like a mortgage broker is only going to be able to do
Right,
I think, a
that-
couple.
yeah.
So it's good to solidify a relationship with a local bank, credit unions, people like that. Let them know what your plan is. And this is something I would start doing now. Like even if you have no intention of doing this year, like my goal is to buy a house next year, 2 years, 3 years from now, I would start talking to people now to figure out, here's my plan, here's what I'd like to do. What do I need to do to start setting this up? What do my financials need to look like in order to be able to get my first home and then buy a second one within 3 to 4 years? Accurate item. Because we don't know what the future holds. What if something global crisis happens and the market tanks and we lose 30%? We can't foresee that, but on average, these are average statistics over the life of the housing market. So we're just going off averages. We can't foresee, like nobody predicted COVID. Like nobody knew we were going to have this global pandemic, we're all stuck at home. Can't predict that stuff. So if we look at the averages though and go off, the history repeats itself in a lot of ways, the past predicts the future, these numbers should be fairly accurate. So be thinking about that because real estate in a lot of ways is patient money, if you think about it. And that's what I always talk about, wealth in real estate. Flipping houses can make me a quick buck. Owning real estate can make me very wealthy. So I can go flip a house and make a quick little pop of money. It's earned income, so I'm gonna get hit on taxes higher if I don't 1031 it and do some things like that. But owning real estate and never selling it will, over time, create massive wealth for me. And that's why I like owning real estate more so than flips. Flips are good for now income, but it's not gonna create wealth because you're only as wealthy as the next deal you find. So you're constantly having to go chase that next deal. If I buy a property and I'm gonna sit on it for 30 years, I'm gonna let this property, one, depreciate, so I'm gonna save on income tax, and two, create wealth for me. Because even look at if you only bought one property at $300,000, let's go to the first property again. One property at 300 in 2023, by the end of the year it's worth 312. 5 years later it's worth 381. In 30 years, that property that you bought is worth $994,000. So even if you just bought one property and never sold it, you could have close to $1 million net worth. Because at that point, the property, even if you just did this one time, right, and then rented that property out instead of selling it and bought another home and had it rented for the next 30 years, it's going to pay you income, your tenant's going to pay off the note, and you're going to have almost $1 million sitting there in an asset. So if you think about it, like, why ever sell a house? Because to your point, that's what a lot of people think is they need to sell in order to buy. And oftentimes too, like look from the jump from 300 to 375. We're not jumping a huge margin. Where a lot of people might go from 300 to 500 for their next house. So we're casually moving up the ladder here as well, and we're not going from my starter house, which is crazy to think like 300K is like a starter house now, which is nuts, right? The 150 starter homes are out the window now. It's just mind-blowing. But we're not going from 300 to 600. So we're making modest increases in the houses we're buying. So does this have challenges? Yeah. What's one of the big challenges if you have a family? Do you want to move every 3 years or 5 years? You know, some people yes, some people no. I enjoy moving all the time for some reason. I like change, so it wouldn't bother me. But other people, like who's been in their house longer than 5 years? Yeah. Some people don't like to move. So does this have challenges? Is this for everybody? No. But is it a way to just start thinking about this and looking at it from an aspect of before I go sell my house to go buy that next house? What if I didn't buy as big of a house maybe as I'm approved for and looked at this model to go create wealth for myself?
But you also have to watch your debt to income.
You do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Couldn't you like refinance a house? Like you could get like a commercial loan under your LLC and you have, so that way all the debt is under your.
Potentially. The only challenge is though, if you refi it, like if it's titled in your personal name.
Yes.
Then
Well, I'm saying like if you went to like say like a commercial lender
Mhm.
and you're like, hey, I want to pull out a loan. You know, I want to buy this house from myself with my LLC. Couldn't you basically do that
Yeah,
technically? So then all the
potentially,
debt is under your LLC, not under you
Mhm.
personally.
Yeah. There's ways to do all of that. There's
Okay.
ways to get super creative with this. It's just figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And that's why talking with a banker is super important with this strategy to let them know what your goal is and what your intention is. And maybe it's not to own 5, maybe it's just 3. Look, I want to plan on keeping my house and renting it out and then buying another one. What does that look like? And start figuring out how to think about that rather than just saying, hey, I want to move into a bigger house, I want to sell this house. Because what if we just kept every house that we owned? Most people will move every 5 to 7 years, give or take, say it's closer to 10 right now. But even that, you're going to move 4 or 5 times in your lifetime, most likely, and own 4 or 5 homes in your lifetime. So what if you kept them all? It looks like this. So rather than owning one home for the next 30 years and having a cumulative net worth of 1.2, why not try the strategy and go get 8 million?
Where were you in 1979? You weren't even thought of.
It's years away. But it's just something to think differently about. And I think that's the biggest thing with any wealth strategy. It's just looking at things a little bit differently, thinking about things a little bit differently, and knowing that real estate is patient money. So in order to create wealth in real estate, it takes time. And it takes, oftentimes, it can take a long period of time, but you can see what's possible by implementing the strategy. Over 30 years, you can have a really massive net worth by not really doing a whole lot other than moving.
So you talk about the upsides of this, so let's look at the other side of the spectrum,
Sure.
potential downside for this, with this strategy.
So one of the biggest downsides is not all tenants pay rent. So we have to think about that. So if you're, for one, you're turning your personal home, which you love and raise your family in, into a rental. And nobody treats your home like you do. Right? So tenants aren't going to treat your home as well as you would. So that's something to think about. When you buy a rental property for the sake of having a rental property, you don't care as much about the property. When it's your personal home that you've renovated and done all this stuff and raised your family in, now a tenant moves in there and they're not taking care of it, so that's one downside. 2 is not all tenants pay rent. So if you have mortgages, you're leveraged now. And so you have to think about that as well, that now I've got my house payment, and if my tenant's not paying the other house payment, I have to pay for them to live in that property for a certain period of time until I can get them out. So we have to be thinking about that. 3 would be things break on houses. So we have to anticipate as well that if the air conditioner goes out of my old home that's now rented, I have to pay for that. I have to fix it. If the roof's leaking, if something's happening. So I'm going to have maintenance expenses on 2 homes now. And over the course of 30 years, I would have maintenance expenses on 5 homes. So there's definitely risk associated with this, as far as there's a lot of risk with it. But in creating any kind of money, there's going to be some factor of risk. So screening your tenants really well before you move them in is super important. Don't rush. Like we've learned from owning real estate in the past, when we rush to put a tenant in, it usually is a big mistake. Like you're like, you've got a mortgage, you're like, hey, we got to get somebody in. You rush and get a tenant in there. You don't screen them properly. They move in. 9 other people move in too. Nobody has any money. Nobody pays their rent.
It's true.
Trash the place.
Place gets trashed. You got to kick them out. You got to evict them. It takes a few months. It's just a nightmare. So stuff like that can happen. So there's certainly, is there downside or is there potential risk? Absolutely.
But with that in mind, there's potential risk with any form
With
of
anything.
investing that you
Right.
do,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's stock market or real estate, whatever.
Right. So it's just an interesting way to look at it and see what your cumulative net worth could become over the course of 30 years.
And the other thing, if you think about having multiple properties under your umbrella, start or form a property management company,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
another stream of income.
Right.
Now you're paying yourself to manage your company,
Right.
I mean your properties.
Yeah. So that's the other thing too, like taking this on to, you set yourself up for more liability. So it's going to be important to, because like tenant slips and falls, now you're getting sued. So it's important to have insurance on these properties. It's important to structure them correctly to limit your risk. So that way, so there's certainly a lot of downside in some ways, and there's, in my opinion, there's way more potential upside than there's downside.
Yeah, the scale reflects positive
Yeah.
with a strategy like this,
Mhm.
more so than negative.
Right. So just think about it, something to think about. Any thoughts?
Wow.
I think the relationships, like with your bankers, are very important
Yeah.
because when you explain what your plan is and you're communicating that, they usually do want to work with you because you're looking, especially like in towns or smaller towns. If you get involved with that, then they know that you're looking at growth and potentially building that local economy too.
Yeah.
So that's a big that's a big opportunity there too. So commercial lenders, anybody like that you can get in business with, and just start making those relationships now, because you never know in 10, 15, 20, 30 years where that could be.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, super important to have a good relationship with a banker that can help you with this plan. So the big things here too are like, don't have a massive increase jump in house. Don't go from a 300 to a 700. Like, you're gonna incrementally increase the level of home that you live in. And over time, you'll get into the big house that you want. Just will take a little bit longer, and you'll have accumulated a lot more net worth over that course of that same period of time. Any other thoughts?
Good stuff.
That's all I got.
Thank you.